Hello and welcome to the Her Drive podcast. Today's guest is Jenny Scholl, and she is someone who I have been following for a very long time on social media, and it's just been really beautiful to witness the continued expansion and growth and expression that she brings in such a what seems to me like I ingest it as a very like gentle, nourishing, loving tone, heart open experience. And I'm so honored to have her here today. She is a multi hyphenate, like many of our guests, which we love so much. But currently is focusing on being a spiritual exploration guide. And under that, she has this beautiful podcast that I'm so obsessed with called Mystic Bloom. She's a feminine embodiment coach, retreat creator, and facilitator, and just so many other things. And we'll dive into all of that. So without further ado, hello, Jenny. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
Yes, it's truly a joy. And without any delay, let's dive into your story first, because I'm curious, like how you got into what it is that you're doing. So if you want to start at like the genesis of your story in whatever way that lands for you, and then lead us up to present day.
Sure. Yeah. I think, like many of us, the story has like twists and turns and peaks and valleys and all of these things. And from a very young age, I guess if we're going back, the part about mysticism and spiritual exploration happened and started when I was very young. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. And the church was like a community really there. It was just kind of like what you did. My high school teachers were also my Sunday school teachers, we were a small town and we did it. And my parents were and still are very heavily involved. And I do feel grateful that church was much more focused on like activism, and we did a lot of service projects, and we were out in the community, and it really was a community. And after that, I went and I studied academically. I studied religion at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, along with journalism, which is kind of a funny combo, but I think I was just interested in like groupthink,
Yeah, yeah, totally. And how interesting of a time we are in now that is very rooted in groupthink and beliefs and all of
Yeah,
that.
I was fascinated. And so that's when I got like a different view of religion, because I started learning more like historical things. And I had professors that had studied themselves into atheism, and others that are on National Geographic because they're like, hey, let me actually tell you what's happening during that time period. And around the same time, right after college, was moved out to California. And that was kind of just like, oh, whoa, I don't have my community. I'm not in the Bible Belt anymore. And I started my own journey of like, what do I believe? And what do I want to do with my life? And I've kind of oscillated in and out of that question for a long time. And I'll speed up the story a little bit. But essentially, I got to the point where I started traveling. I had done everything I like, quote unquote, should do as kind of like a good girl. After, I went to a good college, then I got a good job, and then I started making money. And then I had this point that was like, but am I really doing what I want with my life? So I started traveling, ended up meeting now a great friend and former business partner at a foot massage parlor in Cambodia, who invited me to a house build in Mexico. I was sharing like, oh, I've gotten away from that. I've gotten away from what I used to do in my youth with my church of this give back component. And he said, come down with me. And that's how I started getting introduced to like the people here in San Diego. And eventually kind of through a breakthrough with that business partnership. We formed a nonprofit together. We traveled. I got to really experience. It's so interesting. I thought that like travel was my gateway to like what I loved. And really travel was my gateway to presence. And travel was my gateway to like all the shoulds being removed from me because no one knew me. Right. And I started being like, oh, wow, why do I really love travel so much? It's like I can be in pure presence in these moments because I'm out of my head. I'm out of my normal routine. No one has any expectations of me, which just spiraled and snowballed into a whole thing of like, what is life? Right.
I love this.
And studying what those patterns are that form us from a very young age, which then brought me into energy healing work, which then brought me into somatics work and parts work, and just learning about like how was I conditioned, and am I conditioned in the way I want to be? And how do I uncondition? And through that has come the feminine embodiment and reconnecting with myself and my pleasure and my body and my womanhood, simultaneously to the spiritual exploration of really exploring mysticism and going, oh, wow, I can like expand my view beyond the structures and really like in my heart connect with these energies and with what I believe to be a connection with the divine.
Mm,
So that's a
wow.
very long, kind of complicated answer, but that's a little bit of the path that got us here.
Yeah, to me it doesn't sound all that complicated. It's you walked me through that so crystal clear. And I understand and from my own journey, kind of those steps along the way. And travel certainly has played a huge role in my expansion, coming from a tiny town in a Christian church Methodist, like very like my church family loved going to church. And that there was two places I felt God as a young girl that I can acknowledge right now. And one was in church when we would be like singing hymnals. I would
Yes.
feel that energy, like it would just consume me.
Mm,
And like I remember looking at my mom and seeing her consumed to that energy and grace. And then also when I would be like outside just laying on the earth and just staring at the clouds, same like sensation washing over me in this glittery vibe. Um, but I was traveling, I think my travel was for curiosity because I came from such a small town and just had this thirst, which I still have, for knowledge and how everyone else exists. But I also realized I was utilizing travel and going as a way to outrun thoughts that were in my head. And you mentioned programming and like, how do I want to be programmed? And I think it's such a beautiful awakening moment for all of us when we realize, oh, we've been programmed and we can rewrite the wiring within our energy field, the way our brain patterns are. So I love that you touched on that. So
mm-hmm.
I'm curious through this journey, you're hitting these different points, which sound really expansive. But are there any key moments that really stand out to you as like an aha, or like you had mentioned a breakdown and then a rebuild? I would love to know a bit more about what those experiences were like.
Yeah, for sure. I think the breakdown, breakthrough moment was really when I kind of separated with that nonprofit partner.
Mm,
And I realized that I had had an amazing few years. Amazing, amazing.
mm-hmm,
And I had this realization and then a big wave of grief
mm,
that I had dedicated so much time to someone else's vision
uh,
and mission in life unknowingly.
mm-hmm,
I think it's one thing to do it consciously. And I
yeah.
think it's another to do it unconsciously. And because I was aligned with it, like it served a purpose for me too. And then I was like, oh, wow, I just had all of those years serving in this thing. And then it kind of became that grief circle of like, do I even know what I want?
Mm,
Or is it easier to align to other people's visions? Because I'm like, yes, I believe in that too, which is beautiful. And I'm an executor and I can do things, get things done. So it did bring me joy and fulfillment to go, oh my gosh, I love your vision and I know how to do that.
mm-hmm,
But that's when I also started shifting into like, how much do I want to do for other people versus just like be in my
mm-hmm.
truest essence? And what is that?
Wow.
And it was a little scary
Mm-hmm,
because I didn't know. And I don't think I'd ever asked myself. And so that really became like a time of kind of chaos and kind of confusion and a time of also freedom and experimentation where I went into energy healing. I did some plant medicine journeys. Like I was really just like, who's got an antidote for this situation?
Nothing cancer, it's in you.
Right? Right. And so I continue. It's so funny now looking back because I just continued to externalize that
Yeah, of course.
answer.
Of course.
Yeah, but that was really when I started asking and like these questions, which is why now I love this like practice of contemplation of just like being with and letting the like emergence come from within. But I hadn't built that muscle yet. I didn't know that was like an option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you built the muscle. Here you are.
Yeah, and I think it happened in I tell people it kind of happens in micro moments,
Mm,
right? Of like learning to trust ourselves, of like getting to know the voice within and our intuition and saying yes.
mm.
And then seeing the magic that happens. And then maybe next time it's a little bit of a bigger yes and seeing the magic that, or a quicker yes. Um, and so being able to build that muscle over time and going, wow, okay, I can do this and I can really come alive in a way that I didn't realize was possible.
Wow. I think that is so beautiful and so brave to step away from something that was known, was in alignment for you in so many ways, but ultimately choosing your own path, which is absolutely just inspirational beyond measure. So once you kind of found that muscle, you started moving and grooving, and here we are now. So I would love to talk more about like your present work and what's lighting you up.
Hmm. Yeah, in this moment, we were talking right before we hit record of this, like, it feels like an ever evolving journey
Mhm,
as I continue to follow what lights me up and I continue to follow what excites me and what's coming through, which right now is a lot of the work that I'm doing in Mystic Bloom is wanting to create like a safe space for spiritual exploration
mhm,
and wanting to create a place to have kind of these conversations where we can say, yeah, I felt that too, singing the hymns in church. It's beautiful.
mhm.
And I also feel it looking at the sunset and looking at flowers and like succulents and like, holy cow, like what the heck? Like these are magical little things and we're magical things. And, and having a safe space where there's not a right or wrong, but there's simply
Mm,
like a playground for exploration.
mm, mm. I love that so much. And it seems like from witnessing your journey, you kind of returned to Christianity. I don't know how far departed you went from it. You kind of returned to it, but maybe from a different lens than from which you were actually brought up in. Is that correct?
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was brought up in it, a lot of it was very mental. Like
Mm,
it's like I knew some of the stories, I knew the doctrines, and I could tell, but I didn't have the words. Like singing and like that group feel that gets created felt so different to me
mm-hmm.
than when we were like kind of chanting without feeling from something in the bulletin. If
Mm-hmm.
everyone's like, "Dear God," da da da, and I was like, "Why do these feel so different?"
Mm-hmm.
And I started exploring that, and so it was kind of exploring my personal connection with the divine
Mm-hmm.
and like how do I connect within myself to these energies that I believe are still very much alive today and
Mm-hmm.
that we all can have direct access to.
Yeah.
So in a little bit I did veer away, but I think it was also a blessing because it's like I kind of cut out the middleman.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which
Mm-hmm.
is something that like it's interesting my parents had done too. My parents grew up in Long Island, New York, and my mom was raised devout Catholic. My dad was raised Methodist, and they chose to raise us Methodist because my mom kind of wanted to cut out the middleman. She
Mm-hmm.
had a personal connection with
Mm-hmm.
faith, and she was like, "We don't have to, go in a confessional box, or like we can pray directly."
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I
And
love that so much. And
yeah,
it seems as though there's this reemergence, or maybe it's the first time it's truly emerged, of being embodied in a bigger way.
mhm.
Kind of the untold stories, like the books that weren't included in the final version, right, of the
Yeah,
Bible. And there's some feminine aspects that I would love to touch on if you can.
yeah. I think it's so interesting what's happening right now,
Oh,
and just like the energies on this planet that go into religion, even in the last few like decades. Before the last few decades, more non-denominational churches or mega churches, like they weren't a thing.
mm-hmm.
Right, there were all these little sects that taught you how to believe, and they were pretty structured, pretty like quote unquote masculine in energy
Mm-hmm.
and their rituals. And then we slowly started seeing like, oh, what if you could just come praise to praise? What if you
Mm-hmm.
could come worship just to worship? And letting some of those structures go. And then I find it fascinating that we found some of these books around the same time, like the
Mm-hmm.
Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Thomas, and what are referred to as the Gnostic Gospels
Mm-hmm.
that weren't included in the Bible that we know today. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating to me. And digging into these Gnostic Gospels, which I first got to do through the academic realm, and now I'm revisiting through like this embodied lens, because they speak to Yeshua or Jesus being an awakened being and teaching awakening and actually teaching the path of being able to connect through the divine within our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wow. And then just kind of going back and reading through the history and going, well, that kind of makes sense while these books were left out, because at that time period, church and government were very closely tied. And I don't know, do they want books that talk about you don't need them? You don't need the church because the church was a business and the church was in ruling power. I don't know. I don't know how this group of people decided what went in and what went out. That would have been a very hard decision for me. But
Yeah.
I do know that it's cool that we can go, oh, wow, what else was written around this time period? What other views were out there? And then we can make the decisions of what we feel the call to and what we feel connected to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this period is kind of not only a saving grace of sorts for Christianity, but also a way to tether the Christian faith to other belief systems around the world. Because to me, my exploration has led me to this zoomed out lens where I look at, say, like quantum physics or like Eastern philosophies, like mystical practices all over the world. And I just think like, we're kind of talking about the same thing. We're just utilizing a little bit different language. But when you distill it all down, isn't this all the same? And it's just choosing your flavor of love.
Totally.
Mm,
I believe that too. I believe that there's so many different doorways to the divine.
I like
And I think Megan Watterson, who's a feminist theologian that I loved, who wrote Mary Magdalene Revealed, I think she talks about it as like one big unspeakable love.
oh, mm,
And we as human beings raised in different cultures and different parts of history, like do our best to put human words to these experiences. And we do our
mm,
best to put human words to what God is.
mm-hmm,
And so that's why I love spiritual exploration, because you kind of get to expand and go, well, what if it's this? What if it's that? What if we're all God?
mm-hmm.
You know, like what if? I don't know. And like we get to kind of just ask these questions and play in these fields of curiosity and study some of these other religions and go, oh, that's interesting. Yes, there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing that I find challenging, but also very interesting, is the very legalistic approach to faith that some people have. It's more of like you mentioned, kind of like a head thing rather than a heart thing. And I've been trying to articulate this point to several different groups within my life for a while now. Not because I'm trying to convince them. Well, maybe I am actually. I am trying to convince them, to be honest. Not that they're wrong, but that we're all right. We are
Yeah.
all correct. And I'm curious, like, what is your manner of working with and navigating those waters with people who are very like staunch in their beliefs and pointing that everyone else is wrong?
Yeah. I've been exploring this a lot lately in
Mm,
several different ways. So I'll touch on it in two different ways. One, if we look at it historically, a lot of these religions, especially the monotheism religions like Christianity and Judaism, like they were formed during a time of patriarchy and masculine energy that was running the planet.
mm,
And not to make that wrong, but what they did was create a lot of structure, and that created safety for people. It's just very structured. And so it's the expansion of like those, if it's pillars, right? Like those pillars can still stand.
yeah.
And it's almost like what we, I think, are trying to do, you and I both are like, but we can also take a landscape view and be like, we're including the pillars, right? It's just
Yeah.
like, we want to like, let's see what the rest of this property looks like.
Mm,
And that
mhm,
can be very scary for people. And I know you know this from all the work you've done, because it comes back to safety.
mm,
And a lot of people have built their identity on those pillars. A
yeah.
lot of them have externalized their sense of power, their sense of safety, their sense of something being perfect.
Mm, mm-hmm,
And any wobble to that feels like a wobble to their foundation of like their whole lives.
mm,
So I try to go with the approach of like, we're not trying to break anything, right? Like we're not trying to make it wrong. And if you don't want to look, if you want to hold on to your pillar, like cool.
yeah.
That's great.
Uh-huh.
I want to go see what's down this hallway.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and the pillars are still there.
Oh my
So that's kind of how, and it's interesting because even saying some of those words of like patriarchy and this was during a masculine time, it does create a little bit of polarity, and people kind of jump to defend that.
gosh.
Versus like it's just what was happening, and for
Mm.
not right or wrong, I actually think at that time it probably did create a ton of safety with the structures. Like
Yeah.
people's minds relaxed of like, okay, cool, this is what we're going to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was at a time where there were all these things happening, all these like different sects of religions popping up.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did what they thought was best and what probably helped the situation of organizing it, selecting a certain set of books, saying this is our doctrines,
Mm-hmm.
because that was what was needed.
Mm.
Now, life's a little different,
Yeah.
right? We've got more options, we've got more resources, we've got more access
Mm.
to different things. So I really try to stay away from like the right wrong versus like just an expansion that can hold the all.
Mm. That's so beautiful and profound. Well, that to me what leads me into some questions I have around your understanding of, the two main feminine characters within the Bible, right? Miriam and Mother Mary.
Mm,
Would you like to share a bit about who they were?
yeah,
Because I feel like that knowledge is coming forward in a more profound way these days, but there's still so many that don't actually know their real history.
for sure. And it's one of my favorite topics because the women of this time period were so important.
Mm.
Were so, so important. And again, I think it's like just a historical thing that there's not as much focus on them because it was during a time period where women were valued as less than.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Yeshua's teaching, it was actually like funded by women. There were women disciples. Like he talks about this in some of the gospels and some of the Gnostic gospels. In the Gospel of Thomas, I think they even acknowledge, or maybe it was Philip, that they talk about Mary Magdalene being the one he loved more than all others.
Mm.
And I believe, based on different mystical experiences I've had and the learnings, that they were very much a duo
Mm.
and they had a shared mission
Yeah.
in this awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had my own mystical experiences with both Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, Miriam. And I remember in one of them, I was sitting outside of this like beautiful tree, and Mary Magdalene was showing me because I was contemplating on, in the Bible, it said like they cast out 7 demons. And there's a lot of different interpretations for this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching and I was sitting, and all of a sudden it was almost like I saw in a vision where it was more so the aligning of the chakras,
That
of the
makes so much
7 chakras, right?
that makes so much sense.
And I was like, holy cow, like, like wow. And again, there's different interpretations, and Mary Magdalene revealed, she talks about different
Mm-hmm.
things, but I was like, wow, what if it really was that simple, right? Like what
Mm-hmm.
if these like teachings were this time period where they were together.
Mm-hmm.
However, it had to be Yeshua bringing this through because we were at a time of like masculine rule.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a big part of the story, I believe, is like the love that they found within each other. Even, whether it was sexual or not, I mean, for Jesus to have a full human experience, I think he would have experienced pleasure. But even if they were just like, come on, like it's part of like,
Come on, Father, I was given this body and I can't do anything.
right. It's like part of divine union of like ecstasy.
Right. I feel like,
Yeah.
this might be a little tangent here, just to interject, but to me, like some of my most sacred experiences have been through intimacy, whether it's through myself calling in like a masculine energy, not talking human, and having that union, or being with a lover, a human lover, and there's nothing like it. So I can't imagine
It is a
Christ
direct pathway to
having,
God. Yes.
right.
So, regardless, whatever you want to think about that, they were still like very much this duo. And in some
Mhm.
of the Gnostic Gospels, it even talks about how Mary comes to Yeshua and says, oh, I saw you today in like my mind's eye, in my
Mhm.
heart's mind.
Mhm.
meaning like not a physical person, but like, oh, I saw you. And he says, oh, and you weren't scared. That's great.
Mm,
Like,
mhm.
okay, we're working on this. Like their energetic transmission, the way they were so intertwined. And so I think it gets so lost that like the resurrection is such a big part of Christianity.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Hmm.
It's like the whole thing that claims he was like a Messiah, right? That he rose. And who did he appear to?
Right.
But Mary Magdalene, the one that could see him.
Right. And how beautiful is that? Because from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but going back to like it wouldn't have been documented had it not been true because women were considered so lowly,
Right.
right? In that period. And I'm really curious, like who were the women that were funding this mission, and like why were they able to do that at that period if they were considered, below the men at that time period?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they were able to do that. I think it was kind of like sneaky that they were doing it, but that they believed so wholeheartedly
Yeah.
in this mission and that they were able to follow. And
Hmm.
perhaps these were women that didn't have either men at home, or maybe the men were part of the movement too. And they all kind of traveled in this way because Yeshua acknowledged women
Hmm.
and he didn't put them down as lower or
Yeah.
less than.
Hmm.
So there was this like reciprocity that was happening and a sharing that was happening of opening homes, of opening meals, of funding their way through different towns, of saying like yes, because they were being seen
Ah,
and
beautiful.
they were being valued.
Hmm. That's so beautiful. There's
Yeah.
this book that I ingested in the month of August. I was going through a Kundalini activation, and my spiritual teacher recommended it. It was called, do I have it here? Oh, I do. It's called the Sophia Code. It's back
Oh
here.
yeah, yeah.
Sophia Code by Kaya Ra, and she channels both Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene. And it provided really beautiful insight to me, especially Mary Magdalene, of her connection with Yeshua in a way that it all just clicked together for me in this bigger way. And this year alone, I kind of like left the church, so to speak, um, to go explore other things, and then occasionally would pop in and out to a Methodist church here because I really like one of the pastors, and how he presents information. But for the most part, I would just like, I'm spiritual, I'm out here and I'm exploring. But it wasn't until this year when I started exploring first the Gospel of Mary on New Year, and then just diving into more like Gnostic texts and things and alternative histories, that things have started to make sense as to like the deeper mystical part of the Christian faith that I align with. And for those who are kind of in the same boat where they've left, but they're yearning for this spiritual connection, what would be your recommendation for them to start to explore and maybe come home to something that's more grounded
Mm.
in their hearts rather than their minds?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful offering. And the Sophia Code is amazing because you can feel the energies and you can feel the transmissions. And I also offer a lot of people the book Mary Magdalene Revealed
Mm,
and following Megan Watterson. One, I like her because she's a theologian and she's very studied.
mm-hmm,
And it does something mentally when
mm,
she can actually translate, like, what was this word in Aramaic? What was this word in Greek? What was this word as it was used? How do we use it now? And what are some other interpretations that we've lost?
mm-hmm.
And so it's literally reading the same text, but through a different lens.
Ah, I love that.
And it does something for the mind, right? To
Correct.
be like, oh my gosh, like it's not like we're saying these texts are wrong. It's saying, what if we read them this way?
Sure.
And I think that's a beautiful bridge for some people because
Mhm.
in this process, and it seems like you've gone through it a little bit too in Christianity, there's like this deconstruction process, which I actually think is beautiful, where people are really taking a look at what the church teaches, their faith, what do they believe. And sometimes it hurts my heart when they like stop there versus going through like the reconstruction process
Mm-hmm.
and being able to go, okay, so maybe I don't resonate with this part. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is my heart longing for? And what do I feel like is truth
Yeah.
from what I know?
Mm-hmm.
Because the energies are there.
Mm-hmm.
And what I also like to remind people of is that they were recorded and written by very human people, right? Like we all write things, and the way we're talking right now is through the lens of our own experience.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating. That's why I love the Gospel of Mary, and even some of the like mystic saints like Teresa of Avila, like all of these women that have written things, because it just provides a different lens. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're all trying to do, is put words to the magic.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I know in my own channeling experiences, I've started to question, like, I think even from the beginning, I'm like, I don't know that the words that are coming into my brain, if I can properly articulate like what I'm hearing using human language.
Right?
And I think, is this going to land if I share this with anyone? And what I've kind of settled on at this point is I'm going to just trust that the words that I am selecting, you know, we are collectively selecting, are going to be adequate enough. But it brings me into this state of awe for others who are able to articulate things in such a poetic, profound way. And like with Yeshua speaking in parables, right? Like,
Yeah. An
what a
incredible
simple way,
storyteller.
right? Like, in a way to like captivate the audience and get them to be entertained, but also walk away with,
Yeah.
wow,
He
there's
was
so
like
much more to
bridging the
it.
human mind with
Yes,
the divine.
absolutely. Like, so clever.
Because like how do you make some of these big concepts make sense?
Right?
You do. It's like almost the same as like teaching a child, right? Where like so you sometimes have to think of like, okay, like what do they know, and how do I speak to them in a way that I can articulate what's happening?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and I love that because I think all words also hold energy and they hold transmissions. Like even some of the hymns, I sing them in the shower, I sing them in church, I sing them in the car. And sometimes if I look at the actual words, I'd be like, oh, that's weird. But the vibration of the
Oh.
song brings me such pleasure
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't actually matter what those like little words were from back in the day, because I can feel what was trying to come through. I can feel the poetry. I can feel like the messaging.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. So I'm curious, what do you do in your day that, like, do you have special rituals that you enact daily, weekly, monthly, annually that root you into a state that you enjoy being in?
Hmm. I think this is why I love the embodiment piece and the studying of the somatics, because I've really learned to become like best friends with my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what she loves, and she loves nature, and she loves slowness,
Mm-hmm.
and she loves playing, and she loves pleasure, and like all of these things. And becoming so intimate with myself, I feel like I can catch when I start veering off of that. And I
Mm-hmm.
can catch more easily when I start to become more mental or more busy or like holding too many things in control. And so I feel like part of my
I have no idea what
ritual,
you're talking about.
oh my gosh, it happens so easily. And then you're like, dang
Really?
it, how did I get here?
Yeah.
And so I do a lot of like nature walks and just returning to grounding and returning to the earth. And I feel fortunate that I have a lot of space in my life
Mm-hmm.
to be able to listen to the whispers and to like follow. And so it sometimes doesn't look like a routine. It sometimes looks like, okay, I don't really know why I'm going to this coffee shop right now, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
excitedly curious of what's I'm going to find there.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I call it following my bliss,
Yeah.
and I'm like, where's this little bubble? If you see a bubble and you kind of want to chase it, like, I'm like, is Glenda in there? What's happening? And I live for your sunset, like walks and
Oh
shares
my
on the
gosh.
beach for years. I'm like, oh my goodness. Yes, thank you.
They're so magical. I'm like in awe every time. I've been doing them lately without my phone. And then it's so funny because I'm like, oh, it's so amazing. I just want to share this. Like, it's so incredible.
Truly, truly, Mother Nature is an artist.
It for sure is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, going back to like the divine and feeling supported by the divine. I'm like, gosh, before we had Lazy Acres and Jimbos and all these food stores, like the earth provided for our livelihood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's incredible that we are part of this ecosystem.
Oh, babe, I fully agree with you. And I've been listening to another book recently. It's called The Freedom Transmissions,
Mm.
by Carissa Schumacher, and it's channeled Yeshua. And he says over and over again, like human beings need to reconnect with our ecosystem.
Yeah.
And like you, nature is my saving grace. I live in Dallas, Texas, and this hasn't happened for a while, but any time where I feel like I need to get like no offense to anyone who has lip injections, but anytime I feel like I need to start like injecting myself and changing my appearance to look like something that's not me, and that's a signal that other squirrely things are going on in my head. I'm like, okay, I need to go into nature and reunite with her and just get
Mm.
really like naked and like
Yeah.
be naked here in the presence of my ecosystem and just know that I was created this way and there's nothing that I need to do or change or be. And it really
Mm.
brings me back into a place of centeredness. And I recently went on a journey to go camping, and I did the same like nature nude practice, but it wasn't so much about appearance, but it was about like being in divine grace to practice some magic. And I felt like a wild woman and free and like so godly in
Mm-hmm.
my essence and being surrounded by a bunch of trees, you know. So I think that if anyone can take time and even just go for a walk in the park, or like you said, don't take your phone, just like sit and have presence for a bouquet of flowers. Like
It's so
it
powerful.
shifts you very quickly.
Very quickly. And it's just, we've just gotten away from it. It's like we're
Mm-hmm.
actually getting back and remembering what people and what women have done for eons
Mm-hmm.
is like collect herbs to heal things and to sit on the ground when they're bleeding and to be
Mm-hmm.
bathed by the rivers.
Mm-hmm. Oh
And
yeah.
yeah. So
I only
I'm like,
learned of
whew.
like bleeding, like a blood offering by another guest. Her name's Istada, and a few years ago, where she does an offering of her blood each cycle. And at first, I was a different person. I'm like, huh, that seems odd. But now I get it. Like our planet is constantly giving back to us and birthing and birthing and birthing. And I hold that in such reverence. Like there's this unlimited supply. If only we would step out of that scarcity mindset and start to commune with the magic around us. And I've learned about Ayurveda and then like paying attention to the herbs and things that grow around you. And many times, if you move into a home, there's something going on with your system. You can go out into your yard and the landscapes around, and you'll find herbs and weeds that can be utilized to help whatever that ailment is. And I'm like, that is the divine wisdom of our planet.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am right there with you. And I'm like, oh, the more that we can connect back to that, the more we can take care of her. She takes care of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Well, if you could go back in time and give a younger Jenny some words of
Ooh.
wisdom, to what age would you go and what would you say?
Oh, that's a great question. I would probably go back to probably like 12, 13, like the time where we are getting our first blood and
Mm.
really talk about like how magic it is, how incredible it is to be a woman, how
Ah,
much magic we hold, what our intuition feels
mm,
like all of these things to just maybe from that age, perhaps even younger, but then I think especially stands out to start to form a sense of self
mm,
and start to form that trust within myself, and not have it be something that I feel like I need to hide or I need to do things for other people. And like in my head, my people pleaser would not have come online as much, but who knows?
At least the seed would have been planted.
Yeah, or just
Yeah.
really like honoring what our bodies do and the wisdom that they hold.
Oh, I think that's so beautiful. I've never heard a response to that question like that. And I love it because I've thought a lot about rites of passage
Mm.
and how our society has kind of watered down rites of passage. Like prom, right? Or first date, which are important. But I think what you're talking about is like sacred femininity.
Yeah.
Welcome to the sisterhood,
Yes.
right? And this is not something to be feared or shamed or hidden. And like this is a superpower to get into the rhythm of your own body and that of our planet.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
I recently went to a retreat where they revisited and did sacred like rituals for all of these steps throughout the feminine journey.
Uh huh.
And it was incredible.
Wow.
And that was one of them. And we like rewired and like had people do some like different experiences around what it means, and even traced it back to like, yeah, at the time, a long, long time ago, these were the times where the women were invited into the red tent and you started to like become one of the women.
Mm-hmm.
And to get the secrets and to understand it's like that time between like childhood play, which
Mm-hmm.
even a lot of us don't get enough of until we're 12, of just pure play and
Mm-hmm.
joy without it being shamed or wronged, you know.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, and then to this point where it's like, cool, now you too can like start holding these codes.
Mm. Mm. So, in what ways would you recommend listeners to offer up support to the youth that are coming into this period?
Hmm. I think that's such a big and needed question, especially everything that's going on in our country. It's just to reclaim, I think, their own innate intelligence and wisdom, to reclaim their body, to
Mm.
reclaim their pleasure, to
Mm-hmm.
not have it be shamed, but say it's a birthright and it's for you. Like
Yeah.
there's something really powerful when you can take ownership of it
Mm-hmm.
and understand it,
Mm.
and to celebrate it and to normalize it, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because that's how much can happen if we bring it into the light.
Oof. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I have a very strong belief that talking in a healthy, open way about pleasure to youth could really shift the dynamics that we have in our country and world now, and would relieve a lot of suffering if only that was discussed and embodied as an example. But I think at this point we almost have to just start with the youth, to rewrite it all.
Yeah, but how different would those conversations be that like when these things start coming online, when these feelings start happening, if they're celebrated and like, oh yeah, that is good. That is a fun feeling, right? Like, okay, let's talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's like explore it. Let's talk about what can happen and where you can run it, where you can run it on your own
Yeah.
actually, if you want
Yeah.
to, and play with it in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful for sure. And I'll never forget my mom had given me the advice as a teenager. She said, you should be intimate with people that you love, but don't be promiscuous with your heart.
Mm,
And I was like, whatever, mom. Now I understand the wisdom of that statement.
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It can be profound. And
Yeah.
when you can view it as like, oh yeah, this is a gift that you have and that
Mm-hmm.
you can choose
Yeah,
where to share it.
absolutely. Oh,
So
I love it. I love this conversation so much. Well, Jenny, I would love to leave the floor open for you now to share anything that is on your heart.
Thank you. One thought I just had while we were talking, it's I feel like we did touch on a lot of topics and a lot of people do kind of talk about like, oh, how is feminine embodiment attached to spirituality, attached to Christianity, attached to mysticism? And really, like, I think you can see the threads through the conversation that we just had. And part of like the feminine embodiment journey, and for me, my lens is being in a woman's body
Mm,
and the reclamation of my power and the reclamation of pleasure, and realizing that this actually doesn't go against the original teachings that I believe to be are true from the movement that is now today Christianity,
mm-hmm,
but have just been lost in translation or because the texts were filtered through the lens of a male body.
mm-hmm,
And realizing that actually to experience humanity on the deepest level, it does include pleasure and it does include knowing through the heart and it does include dancing with the energies. Um, so that's maybe just something that I want to put out there, that they're not separate. right? These views of sexuality and sensuality and spirituality and somatics and everything that's happening in our body are all part of what Megan Watterson, going back to her again, calls being fully human and fully divine.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what Yeshua was teaching in some of these Gnostic Gospels, what the women were preaching. It's that we get to be both. And like, what an amazing gift.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that share so much. And Jenny, where can everyone find you, and in what way can they connect to work with you in some fashion?
Yeah, probably right now through Instagram, either through my own, through Jenny Scholl, or through Mystic Bloom, which you'll see on there too. And a good place to start on the Mystic Bloom website, which is mysticbloom.co, I believe, is a spiritual exploration guide, which I love because it has just open-ended prompts about like, what does the word God mean to you? And you get to sit and think of them and like contemplate. And it also has some really cool like quiz questions. Like, what do you consider the power of a guru to be? Like a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And through that kind of like little quiz, it'll kind of show if you are more aligned to organized religion or more aligned to spirituality or more aligned to mysticism. And again,
Mm-hmm.
not a right or wrong, but it's just like the start of this, like, oh yeah, what are my beliefs? And
Wow.
that's just like a free guide that I like love everybody to have because I think it's so fascinating to go through that journey.
Oh, I love that you created this because I've never heard of something like this before. So I'm gonna get on there and do it.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating because some of these questions I'm like, oh wow, I've never asked myself that before.
Right? Yeah, why not? I love any question that gets me in my thinking juices.
Me too.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to share before we say fare thee well?
No, just thank you for having me and thank you for creating such like an incredible place for these conversations through the podcasts and all the work you do. I think they're so needed and yeah, just honoring you for taking up that mission.
I feel that fully, and thank you so much. It is honestly this beautiful peek into other people's experiences, and like my highest honor to get this hear the stories of others and then share it out to others. So thank you so much for being here, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of Her Drive Podcast. You can check the show notes for where you can link up with Jenny. And of course, please leave a review and share this with others. It helps the word spread about the amazing guests that we have. And I appreciate the love.